Hey all, here's my conversation with my friend Kevin Makins out of Canada. Kevin has put together a comedy show. He would call it a comedy sermon, an hour-long production that they toured around parts of Canada and now have available on YouTube. And it walks you through an understanding of the Bible as a redemptive narrative of change, development, and growth. I think you're going to like the conversation. Here it is, conversation with Kevin Makins. You can search for him at kevinmakins.com, or you can just search in YouTube for Kevin Makins. The show is called Holy Shift. Get it? I think you'll enjoy it. Hey, and while you're looking over there at his website, go over to dougpagitt.com and become one of the contributors at the Patreon site. We'd love to have your input. dougpagitt.com. Thanks, friends.
Cool. Where's the studio? Where do you have it?
Oh, isn't that the secret? This is the Peacedale Studios, buried deep and safely inside the bunker on Peacedale Avenue.
Nice.
The outpost for the more beautiful world revolution that we're trying to stir up here. Hey, friends, talking with Kevin Makins here. Kevin is the brains behind and the talent in, I think this is true, of the
talent to be disputed, brains behind, yes,
of the comedy tour Holy Shift.
Comedy sermon. Don't get your expectations too high on comedy.
Really?
It's part sermon, part comedy, part one-man show. I don't know exactly where it fits.
It's got more sermon than comedy in it.
It's got a lot of, the comedy in it is about largely strange biblical laws about penises. So it's all somewhat rooted in scripture,
nice,
but it
nice.
goes around. It goes on a journey.
It's got the humor sensibilities of a junior high youth group.
Exactly, which is really my target audience.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so Kevin, you it's already a dead giveaway for everyone from Minnesota that you carry that intellectual Canadian accent, that thing that us in Minnesota, we in Minnesota always want. Those
I don't think anyone's ever said that before. I'm happy if this accent is desirable in any way.
It is those O's that just make someone sound like they really know the ways of the world. I think it's fantastic. As you know, I'm a big fan of all Canadians. Think the world of you. So you're a pastor of a church a really great church in outside of Toronto. I would say you might give it more of a special location than that. When you tell people where your church is located, how do you describe it?
We're in a city called Hamilton, Ontario, which is actually it's like the 7th largest city in Canada. But what does that mean? Canada's so population-wise so small. It's a city a little over 500,000. It's 45 minutes outside of Toronto. So we get defensive if you bring up Toronto. But it's about 45 minutes outside. It's kind of the other larger urban area in Southern Ontario. So we started a church downtown 7 years ago in downtown Hamilton, made up of lots of the same people that would probably connect with your stuff. People raised in the church who left, people who have never engaged with faith or church before, and this is kind of their first step in. And we've been doing that for 7 years.
And you've taken pretty seriously the struggle that anyone who tries to follow any kind of Jesus spirituality in the world today struggles with, and that is, what do you do with the kind of spirituality you see in Jesus that a lot of people want to emulate in their own lives? How do you connect that to this larger tradition of Christianity and Christian spirituality, and especially the Bible? And Holy Shift is part of your effort to address those issues straight on while being in humor, but actually taking on straight on that the Bible's full of all kinds of things that make a reasonable person in the 21st century just cringe. Right?
Really cringe, yeah. It started when I would talk to friends of mine who weren't religious, had no spiritual background, who, for them, the person of Jesus was fascinating. The idea of God, God as Father, maybe not so much, but God as the universe roughly sounds nice. But the idea of the Bible was just troubling. And usually because it's not usually people had read it. Usually they had Googled, bad Bible verses, and they had found plenty. And we just, when non-Christian people that I knew, people that are not a part of our church, talked about that. That was interesting. But then when people in our church started saying, oh no, we have all the same questions, all the same issues, I thought, okay, we've got to find a way to tackle this and not to offer like the definitive answer, but to give some reasonable, thoughtful way forward that ties this weird text with all of its own cultural history, cultural baggage, cultural illumination. How do you connect that to the Jesus path that we're trying to be on?
Yeah. And you chose to put this together in, as you refer to it, a 60-minute comedy sermon that people can watch online too, by the way. That's one of the things you're trying to do. And
it's free. It's on YouTube. Go to YouTube, type in my name, Kevin Makins, KevinMakins, and it's free, streaming on there. Watch it with your friends.
And that experience of people watching it there, how is it striking people from what you know already? When they watch someone who has some skin in the game is what I'm getting at, right? Because sometimes you can tell when someone has a reason to be the apologist for an idea or for a set of ideas, right? How do you think it comes across to people?
So we originally did it locally. So 2 years ago, we did a tour, and the main image of the tour of this whole talk, Holy Shift, is a bicycle. So, which was very unfortunate because as soon as I realized the major image was going to be a bicycle, I was like, oh my goodness, we're going to have to bike this tour. Like we have to bike from city to city. So we originally tried to do it locally. I value local a lot. So we tried to start local, and we cycled across Southern Ontario. Every day we'd cycle for like 6 to 8 hours. We'd get to a bar. We would set up this bike, set up music gear. We'd had a musician come with me, a videographer, and we would do this 2-hour live show with the people that came to the show. So they'd buy tickets online, come to the bar, and then people would hang out and have drinks afterwards and connect. We did this 7 nights in a row. So that was kind of the first sense of getting feedback from people. And the crowds were really, really diverse. But what we found was it was illuminating to everyone. I mean, we didn't have a lot of everyone that was there understood that the Bible has stuff in it that's strange. So that's kind of the audience. If you're very, very comfortable with if you're somehow comfortable with genocide in the Bible, then, more power to you. But if you have any sense of discomfort with this stuff, we were finding that for people that watched it and then engaged in it in conversation, that it was just opening doors for conversation. And that we did have skin in the game. It's easy to either defend something blindly because you've got skin in the game. It's also easy to criticize something from a distance and just, I don't know if I can say any swear words.
You can swear as much as you want. This is the HBO level of podcasts.
Edgy. I love it. You can shit all over something from a distance. It's very, very easy. But to thoughtfully and hopefully critically and hopefully with something to say, confront stuff in your own tradition that needs to be illuminated. I think that people can respect that, whatever their background is.
You take on the big topics, right? As you mentioned, genocide, slavery, God having the opinion of some people worth living over other people, sort of judgment and a judgmental God. All of those things that stir up so many hard questions and so many.
And all the penis laws, because I could never get over this text about if a woman runs across town and crushes someone's penis. What do you do? We need a law. And I just could never get over the fact they had laws for these things. Because, as I say in the show, you don't make a law if it happens one time. Yeah, right. It's not one goat and one guy. There's a context to these laws that something's going on. And so, what kind of culture are we dealing with? These are illuminating an entire world that, for those of us who live in North America today, we're so far removed. Yeah. It's hard to get our head around it.
And I was going to ask you, what did you find as the value in that? What was it that for you, and then maybe for people who even watch the show, what do they find as the value in delving deeply into these kind of ancient, Mesopotamian cultures, rules of organizing their societies? Yeah.
I mean, it does give a bit of a narrative context to the biblical library itself. So if you're somebody who, whether just historically or spiritually, values the library of the Bible, to get a sense of the overarching narrative of it is incredibly helpful. And we don't expect when you watch a good movie or listen to a narrative soundtrack or album, you don't expect the characters at the beginning to act in accordance with the way they act at the end.
Right.
In fact, a good story is one where all the characters are growing and evolving. And so to take a very meta view of the Bible, to start at the beginning with this troubling stuff, but to move along the narrative in a way that is, hopefully accessible, that you can watch in 60 minutes, to kind of say, here's 60 minutes, here's this flow of the story. It gives you a real sense of who the characters are, whether those characters are humans or kind of archetypes in the biblical text, or the character of God, God's self. Who are these characters? Where are they moving people? And what's the contrast between the beginning and the end? And what does that tell us? If we want to live out that story today, what does that say to us about the way that we should live in the world today?
Well, and that's got to come as a real surprise to a lot of people, that the Bible's not designed in some way that has a static expression about what humanity is supposed to live like. And what you read there is the exemplary lives that have been lived, and you're supposed to match those. Very often, they're, as you bring up, they're warnings, or they're change narratives, or people were like this, they used to do that other thing, now they do this thing. It's a whole different narrative than what a lot of people, even people who are, maybe even especially people who are really close to the faith of Christianity or Judaism or even Islam, would find themselves being really uncomfortable with the amount of don't be like these people that you see throughout the Bible.
Yeah. I mean, the minute you illuminate, people are doing things with animals. This is happening. Sorry to be crass. This is happening so often. There are laws about it. You just go, no way. Like, no way. The world was a very different place. And so to get a sense that these are real people in real history that are being moved somewhere. I mean, I don't know about you. I find the people that grab onto the biblical story the easiest are people that have less history and baggage with it.
Yeah, right.
So we have people that come to our church with no church background, and they immediately go, oh, I get it. It's a story. Yeah. God's taken these people somewhere, and we've got to, it's a no-brainer. But the people raised in really conservative or fundamentalist environments where they are taught not only is the Bible important and valuable, every line of it is equally authoritative to every other line. It just makes it something it becomes very hard to read, to celebrate, and to engage with it. So this is kind of this tour. We found it responds differently. People that respond differently depending on their background. So for some people, it's very deconstructionist at first, and they've got to kind of deal with their anxiety about that. But for lots of other people, especially people who have done their own deconstruction or weren't raised in it, it just gives them a framework that they can then use to dive into the text and hopefully read the Bible in a way that brings them some life and makes the Bible interesting and engaging, because it's full of all this real gritty stuff.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I mean, that's super meaningful to me. I think there's a lot of really good value in that. And I think it really matters that people have a different experience with the Bible, because it's caused so much trauma in people's lives. In fact, at our place over the weekend, we were talking about how for a lot of people, their experience with the Bible needs to be something that feels or matches what the work that's done in therapy when people are trying to overcome trauma in therapy, right? And they're going through a narrative trauma therapy where they're trying to let go of the negative responses that are triggered in them because of certain events in their lives, so that they can respond in a different way, and sometimes even know that the history that they're remembering doesn't have to have the power that it once had. I feel like people have to go through that kind of work with the Bible, right? Like if you had a lot of experience with the Bible and you just walk away, seems to me you've got a lot of undone work in your life that you might want to deal with.
And like, right? Sorry for that. The church kind of maybe owes you an apology, but for better or for worse, you've got that story in you.
Right.
And you've got to deal with that.
So there's that part to it, and I find that really valuable. Is there a part of you that when you were doing all this work, putting all this together, traveling around, doing the video that's now on YouTube, and then talking about it now, do you find yourself saying like, I just wish we could just be done with the Bible after all and move on? Do you think there's something that's really valuable in there, that impulse to say, like a lot of people felt like here in the United States after a Thanksgiving holiday where they had to spend a bunch of time with their extended family they don't normally spend time with?
Oh, you poor Americans and your heavily religious families.
Man, I just, people get this feeling around the holidays, like if I could, I mean, I love my family. I'm glad I came from them, but if I didn't have to spend all that time with them, somehow I think it would be, my life would be better. Do you ever get that feeling about the Bible like that, where people have this sense, or maybe you yourself have this sense, you just want to be done with it, walk off? leave it
Yeah,
behind?
I mean, I gotta confess that the context that I'm in is so different. Like Canada and America, despite the fact that we just kind of, take all your media and consume everything you put out, we have such a different cultural understanding of religion. So, I was raised in the Lutheran Church, and I didn't know another Christian till I was 17. Like I knew there was 4 people in our church my age and a bunch of people my parents' age, and that was it. So we are such a post-Christendom culture. It's been over for at least one generation. My dad wasn't raised going to church, so the trauma is still there because we have people coming to our church and they carry it with them. It is not the cultural powerhouse that it is in America. So I have a slightly different understanding of it. And I have people on the whole have a little less anxiety. Probably most of the anxiety Canadians have about Christianity is watching you all and how insane it is in your political system. And
well, that's what happens when you're a nation.
You export your media.
That's what happens when you're a nation under God, my friend. That's what happens.
One nation under God. We're like one nation under Justin Trudeau's beautiful haircut.
Yeah.
So we're just. That said,
yes,
of course, there are times where I just think, man, couldn't we just find something else to talk about? Community is good, people getting together, but this book is just so complicated. And then at the same time, I don't think there's nothing in our culture that lasts more than a hot minute. Like everything is tweetable and then it's gone. Things come and go. They're the biggest deal for a month at most. There's 15 albums by bands I love I've never listened to because my Spotify playlist is just full. I think in an age where everything is so quick and so disposable, the idea of a narrative that is generationally bound, and I'm just talking here from a secular perspective, right, or psychological perspective, that you can engage in a narrative that is still, even in a post-Christendom culture like Canada, the expressions, be a good Samaritan, like this is still in the bedrock of Western civilization. There's something to the idea of engaging with that narrative, whether that's from a religious and spiritual angle or some other angle. And I think it's valuable to get communities together more than just individuals to look on this common story and pull something out of it because it has been around so long. And it's probably at the end of the day, better than whatever good ideas I can come up with today. Like my best ideas will be good for a week. The Bible, for all of its baggage, has a long tail to it. And I think there's something important about that.
What have you discovered in that on that front as you're putting this particular project together? What stood out for you and said, that there's that kind of idea, teaching, human experience that's meaningful for me and other people to know about? What was meaningful for you in it?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because sometimes you read the Bible and you look at North American Western culture and you say, wow, we are further ahead than they were. So on the topic of the equality of men and women, in many ways, not in every way, we're not arrived, but in many ways we are further along that story. And you could say maybe the same thing about slavery, although we have a lot of slaves today that are in other parts of the world. But at least, there are certain structures that are different. So in some ways we've progressed. We can use that language. But in other ways, we haven't progressed at all. We have actually, the idea of holy shifts is taking holy shifts in a progressive direction, in a truly evolutionary perspective that is making the world a better place. But in a lot of ways, we've made unholy shifts. We've made profane shifts. We are so individualized that when you read texts in the Bible about the way that individuals and communities interact, we almost don't have a framework for the way that you as an individual are tied to the people around you, the way that we've accepted technology, the oil industry, like all of these things that weren't even possible for them in that time, to see ways that we've missed the mark and to read these texts and see ways that it is progressive to us, I think is really important, because otherwise we're going to just think that we are brilliant, articulate people. And I think that we are. I also think we're really messed up and we've got just as many issues as any other time.
So in essence, you're saying that there's this narrative that you find yourself in of trying to outlive not only the history of your faith, but sort of the limits and bounds of your own cultural set of assumptions. If people watch the show, it shifts from
kind of an anthropology perspective of this kind of big picture society, all of this broad stuff. But it focuses in the kind of last third to very, very personal stuff, because it's easy to look at things from such a high distance and kind of get yourself off the hook. But we have an individual responsibility to the holy shifting of society, the holy shifting of the world and of the church. And so there's a kind of personal element I think we have to take stock in ourselves to say, what is my role in shifting humanity forward? What is my tiny role to play? And how do I know what the next thing is for me to do if I'm going to take part in this shifting movement?
What was there a particular insight that you think you and your collaborators on this bring to this conversation that when it struck you and when you saw it being played out in the show, you said, I think we've made a contribution here that others haven't seen yet? Was there something unique to what you all said and did?
Probably not. I mean, no. There's nothing in this show that if you're well read, you haven't heard before. I'm not a biblical scholar. I mean, I have my education and all that, but who doesn't have a master's of divinity? It's not like I'm this brilliant person. It's not like the work we're doing. We're not doing original research for this. We're reading people smarter than us. Yeah. I'm riffing off my professor's work, my professor in seminary who taught me this idea of redemptive movement, and many, many other biblical authors that I'm sure many people in your audience are aware of. The goal for me was I would tell people this, like new people to our church, people from no church background who have troubles with the Bible. And I'd say, go online and order XYZ book. And then when it shows up at your house, read through a 300-page book using words you don't understand.
Nonsense, right?
Like, good luck. It's $25. I'm not buying a book. I'm not paying for Prime, so it gets here tomorrow. So I'm waiting for 3 weeks. Nobody is.
I mean, I care, but it's not $25 worth. I mean,
I mean, what? Engaging with the history and life of the church, $25, not worth it. It's just it was something that was just a bridge too far for people I knew who were curious. And so the goal of this video was, what if we could take this content we found and engaged in and shrink it down into something that is fun, interesting, visually stimulating. I partnered with a guy named Jesse Driftwood, who's now an Instagram sensation guy. You should follow his Instagram stories.
That's a thing.
And the videographer and the editor, we sat down, we had a whole team. We got people from our church and people from our city to be in these kind of montage clips. So it's become this thing that's really watchable. And that's kind of the end goal for this, is to give ideas that you would normally not find in a YouTube video. And if you did, it would be a very boring lecture. And could we instead make it something that you can legitimately pop some popcorn, sit down with some friends, and enjoy watching a biblical lecture about redemptive movement hermeneutic?
And how's it going? What are you hearing from people when they've taken it?
It's been amazing. We've got about 2,200 views at last check in a little over a week, which isn't lighting the world on fire, but is pretty all right. We're moving, and it's going to have a long life. I mean, I'm going to send it to people when they ask me these questions, so I just save myself the work of explaining it. But we've gotten what's really crazy is we've gotten emails from people around the world. We got emails from the UK, from Bolivia, from Honduras. People watching this in other countries that are writing, and maybe what seems so obvious to me, or maybe some of your viewers who are pretty intelligent people and can find these resources. There are lots of people all over the world, in America, in Canada, and around the world, for whom these kind of resources are not accessible. They don't have access to the library that's going to get them this stuff. And so if we can at least crack open a door and say, hey, there's actually more going on with the Bible. It is bloody and brutal and barbaric, and it's also good news. If we can crack that open, I hope it will begin a conversation. Like, this video is not the last word. It's the first word. We're hoping it's a kickoff for people to dive deeper into this stuff, engage in good conversation, and hopefully it's accessible to people that otherwise wouldn't be able to engage with this.
For the people who either are familiar with or don't yet know about this hermeneutic of a redemptive narrative, right? So the idea that you understand a hermeneutic, I mean, you read, you understand the story, you read it through the lens of this kind of change narrative that happens where there's a bettering of society and humanity that's unfolding in that God's storyline. the storyline in the Bible is God's participation with humanity in that, right? And rolling through Jesus and people doing greater works than Jesus does and all this stuff, right? It becomes this whole,
nice.
See what I did there?
Greater things.
It becomes this whole redemptive kind of narrative, right? That runs.
Yep.
So for people who don't know that or wouldn't agree with it,
okay,
what's the primary argument you hear from people that are like, Pastor Kevin, here's what makes me worried about all this? What's the critique? What's the other side of the story that people hold to?
I'll give you the best critique because I don't think I'm right about everything, and I'm not actually concerned about that.
Right,
so if this serves you, if it clicks, then great. I think it's the way to read the Bible. If there are people outside of my church, I'm sorry, I don't care. Like, I just don't have time. I got local stuff to do. So if you're not a part of our church and you're a Christian somewhere else, hey, that's why we've got other churches, and God bless you.
Yeah.
If you're somebody who is checking this out, hoping to engage, or someone that I have some bond to in my church or community, right. The best pushback I'll get is the world really shifting forward? Because it seems like in a lot of ways it's as much a mess as ever. I mean, this was a lot easier to talk about when Obama was president. I could definitely pitch people on redemptive movement. And I'm not somebody who believes blindly in some sort of optimism that things are going to get better. I don't know that that's the story. I think the story is that when you live in this narrative, things get better. And even when things get harder, they get better. So you might suffer, but you suffer better when you live in this narrative. Your country might fall apart, or your country, I don't know if you're falling apart, it might face hard times, but you'll be more resilient to make peace and to do good if you're living in this narrative. So I don't know that I believe all of society is shifting forward. I know that when we live in this story, it shifts us forward. So that would be the best critique I've gotten, is that it doesn't make sense at that meta level. That would be my response and why I would still continue to read the Bible in this way. But you'll find brilliant biblical teachers. I'm sure somebody like Tim Keller, who I think is absolutely brilliant. I think he's wrong about how he reads the Bible, but he's smarter than I am. So you'll find people that can give you articulate other ways to read Scripture, and that's great. But if those ways don't make sense to you, they don't add up, I think this is a very compelling way to understand the biblical narrative.
Do you ever get that feeling that your professor who helped you read these things this way, and other people you've talked to, the kinds of, the crowd of, that involves people like me and you and other jokers, that, look, we're just wrong, and we've worked really, really hard to try to salvage this thing, but we've just gone a bridge too far on all of this, and we'd be better off to either become, the fundamentalist types, or to just jettison the whole thing at all. Do you live in that tension at all? Which I know a lot of people do, or do you feel like, no, you're not naive, but no, this is your story, and you're confident enough that this is.
Ask me again when I'm 45, because I know I'm strictly in that first half of life, which is it's an unfortunate thing to read Richard Rohr when you're 30, because you just know this is all crumbling down. So whatever answer I give, I'm probably wrong, but I'll say you got to honor where you're at as best as I can. As best as I can hold the tension, there's a certain faithfulness to keeping that space that is tense. It would be easier and probably more financially lucrative to jump and be a very articulate, loud, conservative Christian. And I don't mind conservative Christians. A lot of them are wonderful people. That seems like in some ways there's more noise around there. It's easier to survive. And certainly it's easier to jump ship and find some other job, some other thing to do with my days, something else to get me out of bed in the morning. But I think that there's a real responsibility that your audience, yourself, and me, that we've been given to be people who hold this tension, people who honor something bigger, older than us, and even that say the people I disagree with are at the table with me. Yeah. I don't get to cut myself off from people that drive me nuts. And as much as I want to say everyone in the world is my neighbor and I love everyone, I can't. It's too much. To simply say I love those that disagree with me, I love those who think I'm wrong, I love those who quite loudly think I'm wrong, to say, you're still my brother, you're still my sister, I still love you, We're still family at the table.
Yeah.
That's probably the most refining, healthy thing in my life, is having to hold that tension. So at this point, at least, I don't feel a freedom to jump ship in any direction. I feel a very strong calling that many of us are called to hold the center of this non-anxiously, to open up conversation and to say to those who might say, you're not a part of the faith, to say, well, you're a part of my family. There's a seat for you there's a seat for you at the table I'm sitting at. It's not even my table. It's Christ's table, but there's space for you if you'll sit with me. And I think that is a tough thing, but a deeply rewarding thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that too. I mean, I'm someone of very similar sentiments, and I think it's good for people to hear, right? Because it is so common. Not that it's easy for people, but it's so common to hear people who've said, all right, I'm out. I'm just sort of done with it. Sure. I'm just not going to fuss with these things anymore. This is, back in the late 1990s when that movie The Matrix came out, I'm just going to take the red pill and just be done with the whole thing. Right? I'm just going to stop trying to make sense.
And every pastor got their sermon illustrations for the next 25 years.
I don't know what people that make normal sermons have been doing the last 10 years. I don't even know what they're talking about. I mean, I know what people that host podcasts and live streams do.
I think maybe a part of being raised in such a post-Christian culture is, if everyone around you says we're Christians, then taking the pill is getting out of that. Yeah. I'm raised in a culture where lots of wonderful people around me have no faith at all. Yeah. Where most people I know have no religious background. Yeah. So,
and that's why you're committed to socialized medicine, right?
Exactly. That's why. Because I mean, hey, there's a lot of differences. Yeah. I'm less trusting in my own ability to know what is the pill that leads me to reality.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that it's secular. I'm also not sure it's evangelical Christian.
Yeah.
So I think that there's something to be said for sticking where you find the fruit. And I don't blame people if they pull out and they kind of run off. I don't want to judge their story. But I think if you can find a way to see fruit within what you've been given or where you've kind of experienced some life, you have some obligation to walk that road as long as you can.
Well, I'm glad you're walking the road, Kevin Makins.
Doing my best.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I am highly committed in this stage of my life, being just over 45, and in the situation we find ourselves in the United States, and the situation the world finds itself in more generally, that we need to turn up the volume a bit on the messages of a more beautiful world. That there are these ways and times and places, and there's something inside of hopeful, optimistic people that want to tell a story of a more beautiful world that's not just imaginary and sort of idealistic, but is rooted in some kind of a story that holds together. That's got to get a little louder. Because shockingly, it doesn't matter which side of the continuum you're on, whether you're progressive or liberal on any particular topic or politically or socially or whatever. There are people on all sides that are absolutely committed to the future being worse than the past. And they're certain that calamity and catastrophe is the narrative that we should be proclaiming. And it comes out in all kinds of ways. And people that are telling a story of a redemptive narrative that runs through each of us and through humanity and through religion and society. I don't know. I think that's a story worth hearkening. I think
so. And I think it as soon as it becomes us versus them, we have the right story, they have the wrong story. Yeah. You're boring me, and you've missed something. Yeah. But when it becomes, what's the redemptive movement in your life and in your story and in your community is for the good of everyone else. Yeah. Now we've got some good news.
I have a friend who's quite informed and interested in the notion of the multiverse, right? This idea that there's multiple realities.
Are we going there?
That there's multiple realities existing. He said, so in some universe somewhere, there's a redemptive narrative that's in play. I might as well choose to believe that I'm in that one. Right.
Yeah.
If you have to live in a story and it's and one sort of takes the hope and dream and passion and life out of you, and one of them gives you a sense of hearkening to the future. Pick the one that enlivens you. And I know a lot of people are
harder,
enlivened by
though.
catastrophe. I get that. There are some people that are
Right,
just,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
they do really well in those kinds of situations. You know, they're crisis management personalities,
Right.
and God bless them. We need them all the time. And then there's other people that, you know, are a little enthralled with this narrative that things might be able to not have to stay the way they've always been.
And it's a harder path. You know, you want to believe that nihilism is the difficult, true path, but it's just too easy. It's too easy to check out. It's too easy to sleep in. You know, anything. It's just too easy to eat sugary, fatty food and not take care of your body. It's so much easier than believing that the world can be a better place if you pick up the shifts you have to make, and your community shift in the way you have to shift. And I tell the story in the film of the Charleston shooting, which 2 years ago, I never thought there would be such a relevant, you know, the week before it released again, there was another church shooting in America. But the way that church responded to the most horrible, violent, dark situation you could find yourself in, you know, somebody who wanted to make misery in the world, the way they responded to someone who was malicious with this wholly shift forward is the kind of model of that we need in the world, and the kind of model that's going to break this idea that ultimately the world is bound to be a place of disaster. You know, they're the heroes that showed us how to shift forward, and they practiced every week in that little church Bible study for the day of darkness. They practiced forgiveness so they were ready.
Kevin, thanks. If people want to find this, the best thing to do is search for you, Kevin Makins, on the internet, and
go to YouTube, type in Kevin Makins. That's the easiest way. And they can also go to kevinmakins.com, and it's just live up there along with some other resources.
Fantastic. Hey, hope everybody does that. Go take a look and share it around. Tell your friends about it. And are you going to do a reprise? Are you going to take this thing on the road? Are you going to do it again?
We are making we make weekly YouTube videos. So right now we're working on some of those, doing some interesting stuff in the YouTube space. Every week we put out a new video, and then we're working on the next tour. And that'll probably be maybe not for a year or two. Rob Bell, I don't know if you heard this. He stole our name. His new tour is called Holy Shift. So maybe he's stealing the whole tour and it's going on the road again with Rob Bell. I don't know.
Classic.
I know. So, no, we're working on the next tour, and we'll hopefully come by some American cities next time around.
Yeah, we'll get here before the border wall gets built. I'm sure we're going to build one up on that. Or maybe you are building one on your southern border to keep people out.
We're too polite. We're too nice. We can't turn away anybody.
Hey, Kevin, thank you. Congratulations.
Thanks, Doug.